Hi all, today we're talking about Module 17, the basic principles of sensation and perception. So what is sensation and what is perception? So sensation is the process by which our sensory receptors and nervous system receive and represent stimulus energies from our environment. So basically it's the way that our senses kind of get in contact with stimuli or things in the environment. Perception is the process of organizing and interpreting sensory information and enabling us to recognize meaningful objects and events. So our senses sense something, they smell it, they touch it, they taste it, and so that information gets sent to the brain, and then the brain organizes that information and makes the perception saying, oh yes, that smells like my mom's apple pie, or yes, that feels soft, or that feels hot, or that feels cold. So sensation is the physical act and perception is the kind of mental act. So in sensation, the brain receives input from the sensory organs, and in perception, the brain makes sense out of the input from the sensory organs. So making sense of the world. There's two ways of processing information. The first is bottom-up processing. So it takes sensory information and then assembles it and integrates it. So that's, you get this information, you put it together in the brain, and the brain kind of figures out, what am I seeing? Top-down processing uses models, ideas, and expectations to interpret sensory information. So, for example, if you are looking at something and you're expecting it to be, for example, soft, and it looks fuzzy, and then you go touch it, then you're comparing it to kind of the previous thoughts that you had. Is this something I've seen before? So take a look at this bottle. What picture do you see on the bottle? Kids see 8 to 10 dolphins. You can see them there. But what did you see? You probably saw a man and a woman kind of in an embrace, and they're nude. So why do you think kids see something different than adults? Probably because kids have a different perceptual set and they have different expectations. They're doing top-down processing. Take a look at this. I have to say I'm traditionally horrible at these types of things. So using top-down processing, you may start to see something in the picture if we give your brain some concepts to apply. For example, if I say tree, can you now kind of make out a tree? What about a sidewalk? A dog? Or a Dalmatian? I have to be honest with you, I see none of the above, but I'm very horrible. Like those pictures they used to have in the shopping malls where, you know, if you stare at it long enough, you see something. I've never seen anything. So maybe you guys can see something. I just still see some black and white spots. From sensory organs to the brain, the process of sensation can be seen as 3 separate steps. The first is the reception, so that's the stimulation of sensory receptor cells by the energy, like sound, light, heat, etc. So that's our physical way of our fingers are touching something, our nose is smelling something. Transduction is transforming this cell stimulation into neural impulses. So now it's going into the neural synapses, and then it's making its way up to the brain, which is the transmission part where it's delivering this neural information to the brain to be processed. So that's the perception part of it. We'll see in sensation and perception that there are lots of different thresholds. The absolute threshold refers to the minimum level of stimulus intensity needed to detect a stimulus half of the time. So basically, for us to be able to detect something, especially like, for example, a sound stimulus, it has to cross a certain threshold. It has to be a certain number of decibels for us to hear it. And anything below this threshold is considered subliminal. And you've probably heard about subliminal advertising, for example. But in order for us to process a visual stimuli, it has to be presented to us for a certain period of time for our eyes to be able to see it and for it to process. If it's less than, let's say, I don't know how many milliseconds, then while we may have detected it on some level, it isn't actually perceived as a conscious thought in the brain. So when absolute thresholds are not absolute, we talk about the absolute threshold, but signal detection theory refers to whether or not we detect a stimulus, especially amid background noise. For example, as a mother, I can tell you that my senses to hearing my children are very much heightened. Like, many times I'll hear about our kids in the middle of the night and my husband is like snoring away. Or even during the day, I'll say, is that, the baby waking up? And he'll be, no, I didn't hear that. But my signal detection or my threshold is much lower for certain noises, and even if there's other stuff going on, I'm very much attuned to those noises. So despite there being maybe a certain decibel threshold, my ability to detect that falls under signal detection theory. So subliminal occurs when a noise or a visualization is below our threshold for being able to consciously detect a stimulus. Although we cannot learn complex knowledge from subliminal stimuli, we can be primed, and this will affect our subsequent choices. For example, we may look longer at the side of the paper which just showed a nude image for an instant. So if you see those slides up at the top right hand corner, if there was a series of slides, and even if we weren't processing that there was a nude image, if they did it too quickly, we would find that in subsequent slides we tend to look more to the left hand side because we were primed by the nude image. So the just noticeable difference. It's a difference threshold refers to the minimum difference in color, pitch, weight, temperature, etc. for a person to be able to detect the difference half of the time. So when you kind of say, oh, I can see that it's hot outside. So how many degrees is that we can detect temperature differences? That something is hotter, something is colder, because we're not, while our senses are sensitive, they are not perfect. And Weber's law refers to the principle that for two stimuli to be perceived as different, they must differ by a constant minimum percentage and not a constant amount. So it's really, for example, 1/100th of the weight and not 2 ounces. So there's no absolute weight. So we can't say, in order for us to detect that there's a difference between 2 apples, it's not necessarily the number of ounces, but it's the percentage of weight change, which is held constant. So that is lecture 17, or module 17. This is a short one. The next one's a little bit longer. But if you have any questions, again, this was our introduction to sensation and perception. Feel free to give me, shoot me an email.